Commander Vextal, of the Krillian Defense. Kor sat hunched over his drink in the smoky cantina aboard Station Omeganine. The massive alien looked like a walking nightmare to most species, standing 8 feet tall with chitinous armor plating that had been scorched and cracked in 1,000 battles. His forearms ended in razor-sharp claws that could slice through steel, and his compound eyes reflected the dim neon lights like a predator's. Tonight, those same claws trembled as they gripped his glass. The cantina buzzed with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and off-duty coalition personnel. Holographic advertisements flickered on the walls, advertising everything from neural implants to exotic weapons. The air recyclers hummed constantly, fighting against the thick atmosphere created by dozens of different species breathing, smoking, and drinking together in the cramped space. Around Vextel's table, a group of young recruits from across the galaxy had gathered. There was Kethra, a tall blue-skinned Altarian with silver hair, who served as a communications officer. Next to her sat Grox, a stocky Centaurian, whose breathing apparatus wheezed softly with each breath. The youngest was Pip, a small green Zephyrian, whose large eyes seemed to take in everything at once. Commander Vextal, Kethra said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species. The other veterans won't talk about the human integration wars. They just get this look in their eyes and change the subject. Vextal's mandibles clicked. Together slowly? On his homeworld, this sound meant amusement. But here in the cantina, it carried no humor. Smart of him, he muttered, taking another sip of his drink. The liquid glowed faintly purple and seemed to move on its own within the glass. But you were there, weren't you? Pip squeaked, his translator struggling with his rapid speech. Fought in the battles everyone whispers about. The ones that made the High Command decide to make peace instead of war. The old warrior's scarred head turned toward the young Zephyrian. One of his compound eyes was clouded white from an old injury, but the others focused with unsettling intensity.
You want to know about humans?
His voice came out as a rasping growl through his translator unit. A small device implanted in his throat that converted his native clicks and hisses into galactic standard. You think you understand warfare because you've read tactical manuals and run simulations in your pretty training academies? Grox nodded eagerly, his breathing apparatus hissing. We've studied their integration into the Coalition forces extensively, sir. Their combat effectiveness ratings are remarkable, but their technology is actually inferior to most other species. Their ships are slower, their weapons less advanced, their armor weaker. Yet somehow statistics... A glob of acidic saliva hitting the metal floor where it immediately began to smoke. Several nearby patrons looked over nervously. Numbers on a screen. Combat ratings and efficiency reports. That's all you see when you look at humans, isn't it? Recruits exchanged glances. This wasn't going the way they'd expected. Hoped for war stories, tales of glorious battles and clever tactics. Instead, the old commander seemed angry, almost frightened. What you need to understand, Vextal continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, is this. Humans don't fight wars the way the rest of us do. We fight to win territory, to gain resources, to prove our strength. Humans, he paused, one claw tracing the rim of his glass. They weaponized their own mortality. The cantina had grown noticeably quieter. Even the other patrons seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. A hegemony trader at the bar turned to listen, his reptilian features showing curiosity. 2 Vaxan mercenaries playing cards at a corner table had stopped their game entirely. I don't understand, Kethra said softly. What does that mean? Vextal's forearms spread wide, a gesture that in his species indicated frustration. Means they're the only species in the galaxy that gets more dangerous when they're dying. Every other race, when facing extinction, becomes desperate. They make mistakes. They panic. They retreat. His claws clicked against the table. Humans do the opposite. But Sir Grox wheezed, that doesn't make sense from an evolutionary standpoint. Fear of death is what keeps species alive. It's basic survival instinct. Exactly. Mandibles spread in what might have been a smile if it weren't so terrifying. And that's why they're so dangerous. They evolved beyond their own. Survival instincts. I fought alongside them during the siege wars when they were our allies. I fought against them during the border conflicts when politics made us enemies. And I learned something that still keeps me awake during my regeneration cycles. He leaned forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the table. They're not stronger than us. My people can crush steel with our bare claws. They're not smarter than us. The Altarians have 3 times their computational ability. They're not faster than us. Centaurians can outrun their fastest vehicles. They're not more advanced than us. Hell, they were still using chemical rockets when we had mastered faster than light travel. The recruits waited, hanging on every word. But they're the only species that treats death as a tactical advantage. The only ones who fight harder when they're losing. The only ones who turn hopeless situations into nightmares for their enemies. Centaurian recruit at the edge of the group shifted nervously, his breathing apparatus making soft wheezing sounds. Sir, what do you mean exactly? Vextel's compound eyes fixed on the young soldier, and for a moment, the cantina's ambient noise seemed to fade away. Let me tell you about Sergeant Deho, and how 200 humans held off my entire battle group at Kepler Station. It was supposed to be a simple operation, Vextel continued, his voice growing distant as his compound eyes stared into the swirling smoke of the cantina. The purple liquid in his glass seemed to glow brighter as his grip tightened. Kepler Station was just another minor human outpost on the rim of contested space. Intelligence said it was lightly defended, maybe 50 or 60 personnel tops. Standard protocol: demand surrender, accept their evacuation, secure the facility for coalition use. The recruits leaned closer as the veteran warrior's tale began to unfold. Behind them, the cantina's holographic displays flickered with news, feeds from across the galaxy, but no one was paying attention to anything except Vextel S-words. My battle group was massive for such a small target. 15 heavy battlecruisers, each one carrying over 600 troops, support frigates, fighter squadrons, mobile artillery platforms, 10,000 of the finest Krillian warriors the defense corps had ever assembled. His mandibles clicked with what might have been pride or regret. We were expecting to be done in a few hours, maybe a day if they decided to be stubborn. Kethra shifted in her seat, her silver hair catching the neon light. What went wrong, Commander? Everything. Vextel took a long drink, the glowing liquid leaving traces on his chitinous lips. We dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Sensor sweeps confirmed what intelligence had told us. The station was small, barely more than a mining platform with some defensive weapons. But the garrison numbers were wrong. Dead wrong. He paused. One claw tracing patterns on the metal table that left deep scratches in the surface. 200 humans, not 50. 200 human soldiers under the command of Sergeant Deho, a man whose name I can't forget no matter how much I try. Rox wheezed softly through his breathing apparatus. Still, Commander, 10,000 against 200. Those are impossible odds. That's what I thought. Vextel's compound eyes focused on the young Centaurian. I opened a communication channel to the station. Standard surrender demand, broadcast on all frequencies. It's very polite, very professional. Human defenders of Kepler Station, you are outnumbered. 52-1. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to galactic warfare conventions. You have 1 hour to respond, the old warrior's voice changed, taking on a mocking tone. I expected begging. It's maybe some negotiation about terms. At worst, defiant words about fighting to the last man. You know what Sergeant Deho's response was? The recruits waited in tense silence. 2 words that still echo in my nightmares 30 years later. Vextel's voice dropped to a whisper. Come take it. Pip's large eyes widened. That's all? No demands? No requests for mercy? Shh. Nothing? Else the channel went dead. For a moment I thought maybe their communications were damaged. Vextel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I should have known better. Humans don't waste words when they've made up their minds. So what did you do? Kethra asked. Standard procedure. We started with orbital bombardment, precision strikes on their defensive positions. Nothing too heavy. We wanted the station intact for our own use. It's just enough to soften them up before the ground assault. His claws scraped against his drink container, leaving long gouges in the metal. But something was wrong from the very first volley. The cantina had grown completely quiet now. Even the background chatter from other tables had died away as patrons strained to listen to the old warrior's story. Instead of seeking shelter like any sane species would do, the humans were moving, but not away from our impact zones, toward them. My targeting officers thought there was an error in the sensors. Sir, they kept saying the humans are advancing into our bombardment pattern. Should we adjust fire? A young Zephyrian officer who had been listening from a nearby table couldn't contain himself. Closer? That's tactically impossible. No species advances into artillery fire. That's exactly what I thought. Vextel's mandibles spread in a grim approximation of a smile, until we realized they weren't trying to avoid our fire, they were harvesting it. Every bombardment created debris, twisted metal, explosive fragments. The humans, led by their combat engineer Eugen, were collecting every piece of shrapnel, every chunk of destroyed equipment, every fragment of our own weapons. But why? Grox wheezed. At first, we assumed they were gathering materials for fortifications. Desperate species often try to build better defenses when facing overwhelming odds. But on day 3, our advanced scouts reported something that made my blood freeze in my veins. I still paused, taking another drink. The purple liquid seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Sculptures, made from the wreckage of our own weapons. But these weren't random art pieces created by soldiers with too much time on their hands. They were psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind imaginable. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. Twisted metal formed into perfect replicas of Krillian warriors, positioned exactly where our reinforcement shuttles would land. But these weren't heroic statues or monuments to the enemy. They were corpses. Detailed, anatomically correct sculptures of dead Krillian soldiers created from the debris of our own bombardment. Pip's small frame shuddered. That's horrible. It got worse. Eugen had studied our biology, our psychology, our cultural fears. Each sculpture was positioned to tell a story. Here was a Krillian warrior with his claws torn off. There was another with his exoskeleton cracked open. And in the center of it all was a massive statue of a human soldier standing triumphant over a pile of alien bodies. The psychological effect on my troops was immediate and devastating. These weren't just threats. They were prophecies made. From the weapons we had fired at them, our own ammunition turned into a vision of our defeat. Vextel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But that was just the beginning. By the end of the first week, Sergeant Deho's force was down to 120 soldiers. They should have been broken, desperate, ready to surrender. Instead, they got creative. What do you mean? Kethra asked, though her musical voice carried a note of dread. They stopped trying to kill us efficiently and started trying to kill us memorably. Private Hyenwu, their demolitions expert, spent 3 days rigging their own medical bay with explosives, not to kill our soldiers quickly, but to create the most psychologically damaging scene possible. The old warrior's claws clicked against the table in a rapid, nervous pattern. When our assault teams finally breached the medical section, they found the wounded humans still there, still receiving treatment from their medics. Our soldiers thought they had found non-combatants, people who could be taken prisoner according to warfare conventions. Hyenwu had rigged the charges to detonate only after our troops had gotten close enough to see the wounded humans clearly. Close enough to recognize their faces, close enough to hear them talking to each other. The psychological impact of watching enemies destroy their own injured, rather than let us capture them. Vextel shuddered, his massive frame shaking like a leaf in a storm. Half my soldiers requested immediate transfer after that. The other half needed psychological rehabilitation. I couldn't stop talking about the look in those human eyes right before the explosion. Not fear, not desperation, satisfaction. Looked around at the young faces staring at him, each one pale with horror despite their different alien features. Do you understand now? They weren't fighting to win anymore. The numbers made victory impossible, and they knew it from the very first day. They were fighting to make sure we would never forget the cost of facing humans. Every death was a lesson. Every casualty was a message. They were teaching us that even in defeat, they could make victory taste like ashes in our mouths. But that was nothing compared to what we found 3 sectors away, Vextel continued, his voice taking on an even darker tone. The purple liquid in his glass had stopped glowing, as if even the alcohol was affected by the weight of his memories. A human destroyer Indomitable had been missing for 6 months. Command had written it off as lost to pirates, or maybe a reactor malfunction. But our deep space scanners finally located it, drifting dead in the void of the neutral zone. The Altarian recruit leaned forward, her silver hair catching the flickering light from the cantina's holographic displays. No survivors? None. Vextal's compound eyes seemed to dim as he spoke. The entire crew, Captain Minho, Commander So-young, all 847 souls aboard, had been dead for months. The ship's logs showed they'd run into a hegemony raider squadron while escorting a medical convoy. Numbered 8-1, they'd fought for 18 hours straight before their life support finally gave out. He paused, one claw absently tracing the deep scars on his exoskeleton. The battle damage was incredible. Hull breaches everywhere, half the decks open to space, weapon systems completely destroyed. But the ship was still intact, still drifting in a stable orbit around a dead star. Should have been a simple salvage operation. Grox wheezed softly through his breathing apparatus. What made it complicated, Commander? Vextel's mandibles clicked. Together, in rapid succession, a sign of deep distress in his species. The ship was still active, not just drifting, but maintaining position, rotating to keep its solar collectors aligned with the star. When we hailed it, we got a response. Cantina had grown so quiet that the hum of the air recyclers seemed loud. Even the holographic advertisements had dimmed, as if the station's AI sensed the mood and adjusted accordingly. The voice that answered our hail was Captain Minho's, clear as day. "This is the CNS Indomitable. State your business." But that was impossible. Our sensors showed no life signs, no heat signatures, nothing. The entire ship was a tomb. Pip's large eyes widened to their maximum extent. A ghost? Worse than a ghost? Little one? Much worse? Vextel took a shuddering breath. When our boarding parties breached the hull, and let me tell you, cutting through their emergency bulkheads took 6 hours, the ship's AI greeted us, but not with standard protocols or automated responses. The old warrior's voice dropped. Too barely above a whisper, spoke in Chief Engineer Tehine's voice with his accent, his speech patterns, even his habit of clearing his throat before important announcements. "Welcome aboard," it said. "The crew is indisposed, but the war continues." Several recruits shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A Vaxan mercenary at the bar had stopped drinking entirely and was listening with the focus of a predator. My boarding team leader, Commander Zekthrel, asked for a status report. The AI speaking now in Commander So-young's voice provided 1. Full tactical readiness, despite 0 crew. All weapons systems operational, despite being physically destroyed. Full defensive posture, despite having no enemies in sensor range. Vextel's claws began tapping against the table in an irregular rhythm that hurt to listen to. That's when we realized what had happened. The ship was still fighting, but not with weapons or shields or engines. It was fighting with the memories of its dead crew. "I don't understand," Kethra said, her musical voice strained. Tehion was a genius, even by human standards. In the 18 hours before life support failed, he had somehow downloaded every tactical decision, every combat instinct, every strategic thought of his dying crewmates into the ship's core systems. The AI wasn't just following programmed responses, it was thinking like 847 different humans. The recruits exchanged nervous glances, but Vextel wasn't finished. Navigation specialist Jihoon had programmed the engines with his final thoughts. Any vessel that approached with hostile intent would trigger an immediate ramming sequence. The ship would accelerate to maximum velocity and attempt to destroy the target through collision. No warnings, no negotiations, just pure suicidal attack. Weapons Officer Subin had rigged the destroyed cannons to fire in patterns that spelled out human battle cries in our alphabet. Even though the weapons were physically incapable of firing, the targeting systems would lock on to enemies and broadcast the firing sequences to any human ships in the sector, teaching them exactly how to kill whatever had dared to approach the Indomitable. Vextal's voice cracked slightly. But the worst was Medical Officer Yunja's contribution to this floating nightmare. The cantina was dead silent now. Even the background music had stopped, leaving only the soft hum of life support systems. She had reprogrammed the medical bay to continue treating wounded, but only humans. The automated surgical systems were still functional, still capable of performing complex operations. But if any other species entered that bay, he trailed off, staring into his empty glass. What happened to them? Pip asked, in a voice so small it was barely audible. They were processed, dissected, studied. The medical AI would analyze their physiology, test their pain responses, catalog their weaknesses. Every piece of data was recorded, analyzed, and then transmitted to every human ship in the sector. The dead were teaching the living how to kill more efficiently. A Centaurian recruit's breathing apparatus wheezed nervously. "How did you stop it, Commander?" "We didn't." The words hit the assembled listeners like a physical blow. "After losing 3 boarding teams to the medical bay's automated systems, we retreated. Left that cursed ship exactly where we found it," Vextal signaled, the bartender for another drink with one of his secondary arms. "High Command classified it as a navigational hazard. Avoid at all costs," they said. "Dangerous automated defenses. But I know the truth." He looked around at the young faces staring at him, each one showing a different expression of horror. Despite their alien features, it's not a navigational hazard. It's a promise. It's a demonstration that human warfare doesn't end with death. That ship is still out there, still drifting in the void, still fighting a war that ended 6 months ago. Still learning, still adapting, still preparing for the next enemy, foolish enough to approach. The purple liquid in his new glass cast eerie shadows on his scarred face. Sometimes I wonder if Captain Minho and his crew knew what they were creating. In those final hours, they understood that they were turning their own deaths into a weapon that would outlive them by centuries. The hegemony raiders who killed them. 3 of their ships tried to salvage the Indomitable 2 months after we abandoned it. We found their wreckage scattered across half a solar system. The ship's AI had learned from our mistakes, adapted its defenses, become even more dangerous. Vextal raised his glass in a mock toast. To the crew of the Indomitable. Dead but not defeated. Gone but not forgotten. Still fighting their war in the darkness between the stars and still winning. Vextal signaled the bartender for another drink with one of his secondary arms, his primary claws still trembling slightly from the memories. The purple liquid arrived in a fresh glass, glowing softly in the dim cantina light. "You might think I hate humans after these experiences," he said, his voice carrying a strange mix of emotions. "But the most unsettling encounter I ever had wasn't with their warriors or their engineers or their tactical geniuses. It was with their healer." The recruits looked confused. After hearing about suicide bombers and ghost ships, a medic seemed almost harmless by comparison. "This happened during the truce of Vega Prime," Vextal continued, taking a careful sip of his drink. The border conflicts had been raging for 8 months, and both sides were exhausted. Too many casualties, too many resources spent on a worthless chunk of rock that nobody really wanted. High Command finally agreed to a temporary ceasefire to treat wounded on the contested moon's surface. He gestured with one claw toward the cantina's main viewport, where the stars twinkled in the infinite darkness. Vega Prime 3 was a hellish place. Toxic atmosphere, constant electrical storms, gravity that would crush most species. But it was neutral ground, and we needed somewhere to set up field hospitals. Kethra leaned forward, her silver hair shimmering. "You were wounded there, Commander. Badly." Vextal. As compound eyes seemed to focus on something far away. "Artillery had caught my patrol in the open. Shrapnel from one of their plasma shells tore through my primary respiratory system. My own medic said I had maybe an hour before my organs shut down completely." The old warrior's voice softened as he continued, "That's when she found me. Field Medic the Jinn. I'll never forget the first time I saw her, this tiny human woman. Couldn't have weighed more than 40 kilograms, probably less than my combat harness. She was moving through the battlefield like it was just another day at the office, treating everyone she could find, regardless of species or allegiance. Grox wheezed softly. She helped you? More than helped. She saved my life. Vextel's mandibles clicked together in what might have been wonder. She spent 6 hours performing surgery. On me with nothing but improvised tools and her own medical supplies. Had a jury rig a respirator from spare parts, seal internal bleeding with emergency foam, even gave me some of her own blood when mine wasn't clotting properly. The recruits exchanged glances, confused by the sudden change in tone. This didn't sound like the terrifying humans from the previous stories. But that wasn't the strangest part, Vextel continued. While she worked, she sang to me. Soft human songs in her native language, melodies I'd never heard before. Said it would help keep me conscious, give my brain something to focus on besides the pain. I'd never experienced such gentleness from any species in my entire military career. Pip's large eyes widened with curiosity. What were the songs about? Love songs, mostly. About her home planet, about people she missed, about hope for the future. She told me later that singing helped her concentrate during difficult procedures. Said music and medicine were connected in human culture, that healing was as much about the spirit as the body. Vextel paused, swirling the glowing liquid in his glass. When the surgery was finished and I was stable, she helped me to the neutral zone where my people could retrieve me. I tried to thank her, but I didn't know the right words in her language. Finally, I called her Angel, a human concept. She taught me during the operation. What did she say? Kethra asked softly. She smiled at me. This beautiful, gentle smile that made her whole face light up. Then she said something I'll never forget as long as I live. Vextel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Today, I save lives. Tomorrow, if you threaten my patience, I'll end yours. The cantina's atmosphere grew tense again, as if the very air had thickened. I thought it was just human emotion speaking, the old warrior continued. You know how they are with their dramatic pronouncements and their philosophical sayings. I figured she was just trying to sound tough, maybe protect herself from seeming too vulnerable. He took a long drink, the purple liquid leaving traces on his chitinous lips. 3 days later, when the hegemony forces broke the ceasefire and attacked the medical station, I learned how wrong I was. What happened? Grox asked, his breathing apparatus working overtime. I was monitoring coalition communications when the distress call came in. Hegemony shock troops had surrounded the field hospital, demanding the surrender of all coalition personnel being treated there. Standard procedure would have been for the medical staff to evacuate, leave the patients behind, save themselves. Vextel's claws began clicking against the table in rapid succession. But the Jinn wasn't standard anything. When the hegemony forces breached the perimeter, she was tending to wounded from 6 different species. Centaurians with radiation burns, Zephyrians with shattered bones, even a few Krillian soldiers who'd been caught in the crossfire. The recruits leaned forward, hanging on every word. The security footage from that day is classified at the highest levels, but I've seen it. Command showed it to all senior officers as a training exercise. What I witnessed changed everything I thought I knew about human nature. He paused, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's neon lights like mirrors. The Jinn moved through that medical bay like a force of nature itself. One hand treating a Centaurian's plasma burns, the other planting explosive charges on support beams. She saved 43 lives, while simultaneously eliminating an entire hegemony assault squad. That's impossible, Pip squeaked. You can't fight and heal at the same time. That's what I thought too, little one. But humans don't think in terms of impossible. They think in terms of necessary. Vextel's voice carried a note of something. Approaching awe. The footage showed her cradling a dying Zephyrian child, singing the same lullabies she'd sung to me, while remotely detonating traps she'd set throughout the facility, whispering comfort to the wounded while calculating kill zones with mathematical precision. The old warrior's voice cracked slightly. I watched her perform a life-saving transfusion on a hegemony soldier, one of the same species that was trying to kill her patients, then used the empty blood bags as components for incendiary devices. She was saving lives and taking them with the same hands, often at the same moment. The hegemony assault leader finally cornered her in the pediatric ward. where she was treating wounded younglings from half a dozen species. He gave her one last chance to surrender, threatened to execute every patient in the facility if she didn't comply. Vextal's mandibles spread in a grim approximation of a smile. You know what she said? The recruits waited in tense silence. The same thing she'd said to me 3 days earlier. Today I save lives. Tomorrow, if you threaten my patients, I'll end yours. Except this time, tomorrow had arrived. What happened to the assault leader? Kethra asked, though her musical voice carried a note of dread. They found him later, after the rescue teams arrived. The Jinn had used a pediatric surgical laser to perform what she called aggressive tumor removal. Apparently, she considered anyone who threatened children to be a malignant growth that needed immediate excision. The cantina was completely silent now, every patron hanging on the old warrior's words. That's when I understood the true terror of humanity, Vextal said, his voice barely audible. They don't separate their capacity for creation and destruction. Other species, we have warriors and we have healers. We have builders and we have destroyers. We have love and we have hatred, and we keep them in different parts of our minds. He looked around at the young faces staring at him, each one showing a different expression of horrified fascination. But humans, their healers are warriors. Their warriors are philosophers. Their love and their hatred come from the same source, making both absolutely unlimited. Though Jean didn't save those patients despite being willing to kill for them. She saved them because she was willing to kill for them. Gastel raised his glass in another mock toast. To Field Medic the Jinn, what taught me that human compassion isn't the opposite of human violence. It's the same thing, pointed in different directions. Vextal finished his drink and set the empty glass down with a soft clink that seemed to echo in the silent cantina. The purple residue at the bottom continued to glow faintly, like the dying embers of a star. He looked around at the assembled recruits one final time, his compound eyes taking in each face with the weight of someone who had seen too much and lived to tell about it. You want to know why the Coalition integrated humans instead of conquering them? He asked, his voice carrying a finality that made several patrons shift nervously in their seats. Why we made them partners instead of prisoners. Why the greatest military alliance in galactic history decided to negotiate with a species that had been at war with us for 3 years. The recruits nodded eagerly, though some of them looked like they weren't sure they really wanted to hear the answer. It wasn't. Because we couldn't defeat them, Vextal continued, rising slowly from his chair. His massive form cast long shadows across the cantina floor, and the scars on his exoskeleton seemed to gleam in the neon light. We had superior numbers, better technology, more advanced weapons, unlimited resources. Our fleets outnumbered theirs, 50-1. Our ground forces were stronger, faster, and better trained. By every measurable standard, we should have crushed them in 6 months. He paused, one claw tracing the rim of his empty glass. We could have won. That's the truth that keeps me awake during my regeneration cycles. We absolutely could have. One, a young Krillian officer who had been listening from the bar, approached the table. Unlike the other recruits, this one had the bearing of someone who'd seen actual combat. Sir, if we could have one, then why didn't we? What stopped us? Spextal's mandibles clicked together in what might have been appreciation for the direct question. Because victory against humans isn't about defeating their military forces. It's about surviving what comes after. And we realized that no matter how completely we destroyed their fleets, no matter how many worlds we conquered, no matter how thoroughly we scattered their people across the galaxy, we would never truly defeat them. I don't understand, Kethra, said her musical voice strained with confusion. If you destroy their military, how can they continue fighting? Because humans don't fight to win battles, child. They fight to ensure their enemies can never truly defeat them. Every human we killed became a teacher. Every defeat became a lesson. Every world we conquered became a training ground for the next generation of human resistance fighters. Vextel began pacing slowly around the table, his heavy footsteps echoing in the cantina. Let me give you some examples. Sergeant Deho, who died defending Kepler Station with his 200 soldiers, had spent the previous 2 years training human commanders across 17 different sectors. His tactics, his strategies, his psychological warfare techniques, all of it was recorded, analyzed, and distributed to every human military unit in the galaxy before he ever set foot on that station. The old warrior's voice grew more intense as he continued. By the time we finally overran Kepler Station, there were 50 other human commanders who could fight exactly like Deho. But they weren't just copying his methods, they were improving on them. Each one had studied our response to his tactics and developed countermeasures we'd never seen before. Grox wheezed nervously through his breathing apparatus. But surely that was just one example, sir. One exceptional case.
Add one example.
Vextal's compound eyes fixed on the young Centaurian with unsettling intensity. Engineer Tehine's ghost. Ship protocols were downloaded and improved by human technicians across the galaxy within days of our encounter with the Indomitable. By the end of the war, every human vessel in their fleet had been equipped with similar systems. Dead crews that could continue fighting indefinitely, AI systems programmed with the tactical knowledge of deceased commanders. Automated defenses that grew more sophisticated with each engagement. He stopped pacing and turned to face the assembled. Recruits directly. Field Medic the Jinn's combat medicine techniques became standard training for all human medical personnel within 6 months of the Vega Prime incident. Every human medic in their forces could perform surgery while simultaneously conducting military operations. Their hospitals became fortresses. Their healing centers became weapons manufacturing facilities. The cantina had grown so quiet that the hum of the life support systems seemed deafeningly loud. Even the holographic advertisements had dimmed to almost nothing, as if the station's AI was responding to the mood of the patrons. We realized that fighting humans was like fighting some kind of adaptive organism, Vextal continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Every tactical victory we achieved became a strategic loss. They were learning from their defeats faster than we could inflict them. Each battle made them stronger, more dangerous, more unpredictable. A Vaxan mercenary at the bar had turned completely around to listen, his reptilian features showing the same fascination and horror as the young recruits. High Command brought in the best strategic analysts from 6 different species, Vextal said. Krillian tactical experts, Altarian computational specialists, Centaurian logistics masters, Zephyrian psychological warfare consultants. They ran simulations for months, trying to find a way to achieve final victory against human resistance. What did they conclude? Pip asked, in a voice so small it was barely audible. That there was no such thing as final victory against humans. That the very concept was meaningless when applied to their species. Vextal's mandibles spread in a grim smile. The analysts determined that even if we managed to kill every human in the galaxy, their influence would continue to spread. Their tactics would be studied and adopted by other species. Their technology would be reverse-engineered and improved. Their philosophy of warfare would infect the military thinking of every race they'd ever encountered. Cantina's exit, his massive form seeming to fill the doorway. The war ended when our high command finally understood what I'm telling you now. Humans have weaponized their own mortality. Death doesn't defeat them, it graduates them. They become martyrs, legends, cautionary tales that inspire the next generation to fight harder, think smarter, and die more meaningfully. Vextal paused at the threshold, looking back at the young officers one final time. The peace treaty wasn't signed because we developed some sudden respect for human courage, or because they proved themselves worthy allies through noble sacrifice. It was signed because the alternative, continuing to fight a species that treats extinction as evolution, was unthinkable. Every species in the galaxy fights to survive, he continued, his voice carrying across the silent cantina like a funeral dirge. Humans fight to become immortal through the memory of their enemies. They don't just want to win wars. They want to ensure that every being who ever faces them in combat will carry the scars of that encounter for the rest of their lives. The old warrior stepped through the doorway, then turned back one final time. Remember this when you serve alongside humans in the Coalition fleet. They're not just your allies. They're not just fellow soldiers fighting for the same cause. They're a constant reminder that some forms of warfare transcend death itself. that some battles continue long after the shooting stops, that some victories are so complete they reshape the very nature of conflict across the galaxy. His compound eyes swept across the assembled faces one last time. Pray to whatever gods you worship that they never have reason to remember that truth. Because if humanity ever decides that the coalition has become their enemy instead of their ally, then all of us, every species, every world, every civilization in this galaxy, will discover exactly what it means to face an opponent that has spent centuries perfecting the art of posthumous warfare. With that, Commander Vextel of the Krillian Defense Corps stepped into the corridor and disappeared into the shadows between the flickering lights of Station Omeganine. The cantina remained silent for a long time after the veteran had departed, his words hanging in the air like the smoke from a battlefield. The recruits sat frozen in their chairs, each one processing the implications of what they'd heard. The purple glow from Vextel's empty glass finally faded to nothing, leaving only darkness and the quiet hum of machinery keeping them all alive. In the void, finally Kethra spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think he was telling the truth?" No one answered. In the distance, the station's communication system crackled with routine traffic from Coalition vessels, many of them crewed by humans who served alongside aliens with the same dedication and professionalism they'd once reserved for killing them. The recruits eventually dispersed to their quarters, but none of them slept well that night. And in the years that followed, whenever they served alongside human personnel, they would remember the old Krillian warriors' warning and wonder what dreams of war still haunted the minds of their human comrades. The end.